I've already seen many of you, and many of you have been puzzled perhaps at all the questions and interested at the same time, because those of you who've been through the hour to an hour and a half interview realize that we're interested in a lot of detail. And there's good reasons for this, which I'm going to get into. But first of all, I want to give a brief explanation of what homeopathy means. Homeopathy is a word that comes from the Greek. And the first part of it, homeo, from homois, means the same as, or similar. And the second part, pathy, comes from pathos, or sickness or illness, from which we get our word pathology. So, homeopathy denotes a system whereby we use a medicine which can cause the same symptoms that the patient is complaining of. So in a sense, it's kind of a matching game. We are trying to match the symptoms of the patient with the known pathogenesis of the medicine. Now that's a big word, and that means what we know the medicine can cause in healthy people. Now, this is quite different from conventional medicine, which we homeopaths labeled allopathy years ago, from the Greek allo, meaning other. And the idea in much of conventional medicine, not all of it, but much of it, is to counter a medicine that counters or goes against the symptoms. So we have all these conventional medicines which are an opposing force. If you have bad diarrhea, they used to give out paregoric, which contains some opium or something similar to opium, which would cause the bowel to sort of cramp down and shut off, and thereby stop the diarrhea. So that's an opposing force. It's force opposed to force. We have anti-hypertensions. We have antidepressants. We have anti-this, anti-that. All these anti-medicines. It's reflected in the actual names of the drugs. Anti-epileptic, anti-this, anti-that. The idea is to stop, through a chemical formula, what's going on. Now, the homeopathic approach would be quite the opposite, literally 180 degrees opposite. So if you had diarrhea, we might give a medicine which, when given to healthy people, could cause diarrhea. Strange as it sounds. The reason it works, apparently, is because we give it in a tiny, tiny, small dose. One of the key features of homeopathic medicine is the small, or as we say, infinitesimal dose. In fact, the dose is so small that if it were analyzed by a chemist, nothing would be found. All this is rather counterintuitive and rather strange at first. And it's also why we've been called quacks for the last 250 years by the conventional doctors who think this is all nonsense. There is something in conventional medicine which is analogous to homeopathy, and that's allergy desensitization. So if you've ever had it, and some of you in this room have had allergy desensitization, when you're allergic to various pollens, various foods, you often go in once a week and get an injection under the skin with the same substance. If you're allergic to a certain pollen, they will take that pollen and inject it into you in a low dose and gradually build it up so it's a higher and higher dose until it's the same strength that you encounter in the atmosphere. So that's the idea, which is really a homeopathic idea. But it's a rather narrow interpretation, because with homeopathy, we give a medicine which isn't directed toward one specific thing, like a pollen or a food, but rather it's directed at the whole organism. It's directed at the mental symptoms, the emotional symptoms, and the physical symptoms. And when we get a good correspondence, that medicine can cure. So, where did homeopathy come from? Well, it's kind of the brainchild of Samuel Hahnemann. Hahnemann spelled H-A-H-N-E-M-A-N-N. Samuel Hahnemann was born in the 18th century, and from the very outset was a very, very intelligent young man. And his father saw to it that he was homeschooled. He learned many, many languages, and eventually ended up knowing something like over 10 languages, including Arabic and possibly even Sanskrit. He spoke all the European languages, or read them, including English.
From where? Where is he from?
Hahnemann was German.
Germany.
Now, Hahnemann became a chemist, and later became a medical doctor. In the 18th century, they had this extraordinary theory of humors, which I've never bothered to study very closely because it's considered laughable now. But they had the idea that was that when people got into a sick state, their humors were in disorder, and they were treated basically in two different ways. They were treated either by bleeding or by purging. Purging means you give something that makes people vomit or have diarrhea. Bleeding is you cut into the vein and then have some blood drain out. Or they put leeches on people. In fact, so prevalent was the practice of bleeding that the cultivation of leeches would have been the equivalent of a multi-million-dollar business today, but it was in the thousands of dollars then. Leeches were cultivated and used extensively.